for the Research Development Institute. And this is Karen Walker, who will be presenting on competitive intelligence today.
And thank you, Tina. Can you guys see my slides okay? Is it in slide view?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to turn my camera off and hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Tina. All right. Well, yeah, as Tina said, I'm going to be talking today. Thanks for showing up. I'm going to talk a little bit about competitive intelligence. I'm our Associate Director of Competitive Intelligence here at the Research Development Institute. And what are we going to be talking about? Well, if I can get the slide to move forward. I know that competitive intelligence is still a fairly new topic at universities, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is and how I apply it to supporting research, helping faculty and leadership in making decisions. And then I'm going to move into another aspect of CI, which is situational awareness and understanding how we can move from being reactive to being more proactive in what we do. And a big part of that is monitoring the research landscape. So kind of understanding what's going on by looking at a variety of inputs. And so I know that we're living in really, challenging times right now. It's very uncertain what's going on. And I try to be upbeat, and when my glass is half full, I feel a lot like Professor Einstein. I say, well, maybe there's a lot of opportunities because of what's going on. But there are always those times where my glass is half empty and I feel more like Bill Murray in Ghostbusters. And I'm like, what is going on? So I know a lot of us feel that way. But I do feel like I can use my CI training to understand what's going on in the landscape and try to make some sense of things. So competitive intelligence is really a practice that has been in industry and government for decades, but we've only recently brought it into the university space to try to help folks make more informed decisions. And so, we collect information, analyze it, and then put that into context for our stakeholders, trying to provide actionable insights. And really the goal here is to get away from all of the data dumps that people have been seeing for years and years, and really try to give people, meaningful recommendations that have been arrived at by synthesizing, different streams of information. And like I said, putting that into context so that people have what they need to make good decisions. And any good CI practice is built on 5 pillars. So when I started doing this, I went out to an organization called the Strategic and Competitive Intelligence Professionals Organization. I got certification. And so the training I got informed me, of how to do this practice. And so they said, you got to build your practice on being strategic. So meaning you align what you're doing with organizational goals. You have to be unbiased. So you have to approach everything, objectively. The work that you do has to be measurable in some way so that your stakeholder can make value judgments. That ability to make a judgment leads into doing something actionable, so they can act on what you give them. And then finally, you have to have some defined processes which are repeatable, so that you have an efficient and reliable process that you can do over and over again. And competitive intelligence in the research office is really focused on questions that are primarily related to funding in some way. And so there's these 3 domains that the CI analyst focuses on. There's the sponsors who, are the ones who are providing the funding that drive research. There's competitors out there who, are also competing for that funding. And then there's our home institution and the capabilities and abilities of our faculty that we have to understand. And so if we can align our strengths with the sponsor's priorities and then determine how to differentiate ourselves from our competitors, we can become much more competitive for that sponsor funding. And I should also note that our competitors can also become our collaborators when we need to fill gaps, sometimes in those areas where maybe we're not so strong. So you might ask, like, well, what does this look like on a functional level? So the questions that the CI analyst is asked to answer or respond to really depend upon who the stakeholder is. And when we're answering questions for faculty, those questions typically revolve around their research, right? That makes sense. So they want to know things like who can they go to get funding? What sponsors align really well with their work? They may have a funding opportunity that they've found, and they want to know how can they be more competitive for that funding opportunity. What do they need to do? How do they figure that out? When we're working with leadership, they tend to have questions that are more institutional. So they want to understand how good are we at, say, robotics? Who are the top institutions? How do we compare to those institutions? What funding is available? What would we need to do to bring up our strengths in those areas, and questions like that. And so those are the sort of things that we try to answer using competitive intelligence techniques. And so there's essentially 5 standard products that we've defined that we deliver to stakeholders. And if you go to our website, let's see if I can maybe put this in the chat. Oh, if I could find the chat now that everything's been minimized here. Let me see. Well, I will definitely put it in the chat later. But if you go to our website, you'll see our lovely website, our RDI website. And do avail yourself of looking at other things like think tanks, our events. There's a lot there that will tell you about what the RDI does as a whole. But if you go to what we do and you look at competitive intelligence, you'll see we have our diagram there about our sponsors. But if you go down a little bit further, you'll see that we have these deliverables that we offer. And so these 5 standard products, we can create for stakeholders, and they're pretty well defined. And so I kind of touched on sponsor analysis and program analysis when I was talking about what a lot of faculty are looking for. Again, we can go out and do a profile of a sponsor and talk about the types of priorities they have, the things they've funded. We can look into funding amounts and that sort of things. Program analysis will go and take a program that someone's interested in. We'll go and look at past awards. We'll do analysis of those awards and figure out, generally speaking, what types of PIs are getting them, what types of institutions. We can look at research topics, we can look at amounts, and so on and so forth, to try to create sort of a profile of who's won in the past, to give an idea of what sort of things you should be doing to be competitive for that program. A landscape analysis looks at a research area, and so this is the sort of thing that we've done. I've done that a number of times when maybe the university is thinking of, like, should we be developing a center? Should we be putting together some sort of large, institution or something around a topic area? So again, going out, seeing what's out there in the landscape, understanding the funding available. Sometimes when a faculty member is thinking that they want to go after a center grant, might do the same kind of analysis. Capacity analysis looks internally at the capabilities we have. Again, it could be in a given area, just trying to understand in a much more holistic sense who all is contributing to an area. So, again, if I had the topic of robotics, I wouldn't just look at what faculty are developing, like hardware and software, but I would want to know, who's doing policy work in robotics? Who's looking at like, uh, human machine interactions? Maybe there's some legal things we should think about. All of that together, because we need to understand that whole space. And then finally, external profiles. A lot of times, um, the university is interested in maybe hiring somebody. So we might go out and profile that, or it could be faculty members again need to fill a gap, and so they might want to look at, where could we go to find someone to team with. Um, Profiles can be individuals, it could be organizations. So that's something that you can go out and find information on, to help, again, answer questions, resolve issues, and so forth. So another aspect of CI is this concept of situational awareness. And while I say it's an aspect of CI, it's also something I think it's really important for everybody who's um, working in research. It's really important to understand what's going on out there in that greater research landscape, because we need to understand how things are being impacted or affected. And we've especially, this last 9 months, I think we're all aware that what goes on in the federal space can be very critical to how we're affected with funding. And right now, most universities tend to be in a very reactive state. We tend to wait for a funding announcement to come out. We tend to be waiting to hear, what the next thing is that's going to happen before we do anything. But what we need to do is start moving into a more proactive one, so that we're looking ahead and we're planning for things. So we start planning for, oh, we know this funding opportunity is going to come out in 9 months. Can we start building a team, or thinking about how we're going to do this? Or we've seen something that indicates that this funding agency is going to start prioritizing this research area. What can we do? I think a good example of us being more proactive is our think tanks that we've set up. And we've got, that's like a ground up effort, and it's really, going in the right direction as far as faculty deciding what they want to do and moving things forward, and building networks. But we could do a lot more of that, and we could get more information about where things are going through a lot of these monitoring efforts. And so I do monitoring. I'm one person, though. I can only do so much. So I like to encourage other people to figure out what are important resources to them and how can they monitor them. And so, by doing this sort of monitoring, hopefully we can start thinking strategically and positioning ourselves better. And so some of the things that I track are listed here. So I look at budgets, I look at the budget requests, but I also, once we get a real budget, which hopefully will happen at some point, we'll get agency budgets, and those will tell us a little bit more about where money is actually going in these agencies. There's a lot of different memos that go out in the federal government that I like to look at. Some of these, are White House memos, but there's agency memos. And again, they focus on a lot of different topics. There could be budget issues. A lot of it can be around restructuring, priorities. So there's just certain agencies and groups that I'll follow and try to get memos from them to see if they're meaningful. Agency planning meetings are another great way to get information ahead of time. The NIH has these sessions called concept clearances. So that's where they'll actually start planning for, what sort of opportunities are they going to be offering in the future. Sometimes those are available via, virtual sessions. NSF has had some of those in the past. A lot of the agencies do that. It's kind of hit or miss, but those can be good ways to hear about what's coming down the road in the future. RFIs are a great resource, which I'm also going to talk about in a few minutes. But the RFIs, request for informations, that gives us an opportunity to actually influence things that the agencies are doing. So that's a good way for us to get ahead of things, because if you can have some input, you can make sure that, things you want to do actually happen. Webinars, a lot of the webinars that are useful are things like, webinars for funding opportunities that are coming out. A lot of times the program officers will say things in the webinars that are not, posted anywhere on the websites. So those are really useful things to attend. Human intelligence, the same kind of thing. If you can speak with program officers, sometimes you'll find out things that you would never find elsewhere. And there's other folks in the agencies you might talk to. Again, that, you'll find things that you couldn't find on a website. And then finally, policy activities are a really important thing to monitor. This year I've seen more policy stuff than ever before, and I've been doing this for about 15 years. And I'll talk about this at the end of the talk here, but obviously, policies, legislation really shapes the direction of, the management of the agencies, funding for research, who's at the agency. And so we really need to kind of keep track of that. Now, this is from the American Institute of Physics budget tracker, and I'm going to share some links in this presentation that we'll send out to you. So don't worry too much about the links. I will share those. But this is a great website that they have for following the changes that are going on in the legislative process. So you can kind of see here, they've got both the presidential budget request, and then they've got what's going on in the House and the Senate. And the great thing to see with this is that in most of the cases here, the Congress is not, not following strictly the presidential budget request, which was really terrible this year. It dramatically lowered a lot of the budgets of agencies like NIH and NSF. But what we see going on here is that mostly the House and the Senate are keeping budgets near the FY25 levels, but we don't have a budget passed yet, of course. Normally we would hope to see them come together and consolidate and create a budget, but that hasn't happened yet. But the promising thing is that it looks like they're not going to dramatically lower NSF's budget or NIH's budget. So that gives us some hope. So the important thing about budgets, though, is that if you understand the budgets of the agencies, it helps you to understand who has money to spend and where they're putting their money. And once we do have a real budget, then you can go in and you can actually look at agency budgets and figure out, are they supporting areas where I'm getting my, research funded? Where are they putting the money? Do they have new programs and so forth? And so this is an older budget that I just pulled out from NSF. But it illustrates a few things. So on the left-hand side, this is a budget summary table from NSF, and it just shows sort of high-level stuff. So it shows the different directorates, how much money they're getting, and it also shows what they got in like previous year. And a lot of times that's very telling, because if you see any big decreases or if you see any big increases, again, it shows you where they're prioritizing things. And if you're, one of your main resources for funding is in there, it's important for you to understand, like, is it going up? Is it going down? What's happening there? And then on the right-hand side, this is deeper into the budget, where they start talking about actual programs and where are they putting money, where are the investments, and you can kind of see where things are either going up or down again, but they start talking about the programs, what they're going to support. There's actually some new programs that they put in here. And when we start saying new programs, these are things that when I'm crawling through the budget, I take note of, because there may be new stuff in there that I can tell our faculty about, like, oh, I'll notice it maybe and say, oh, this is like Professor so-and-so's research. So these are the sort of things that I will spend my time on once we get a budget that comes out. So I find these to be, extremely valuable. Now, another useful thing, I talked about memos. There was a memo that came out just last month. It was September 23rd. And this memo came out. It was a joint memo from the OSTP, so that's the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and also it was from the Office of Management and Budget. And this listed the administration's budget priorities in research. So again, Congress has the ultimate say on what actually gets spent in the budgets, but obviously the administration has a lot of sway on Congress. So it's important to know what the administration is interested in funding. And they listed 5 really broad areas of science and technology that they were focused on funding. And so I'll talk a little bit about these 5 areas, but I think it's just important to kind of be aware of them. The first area that they were focused on is this critical and emerging technologies. And I think this is not anything new, looking at things like AI and quantum, semiconductors. Past administrations were also focused on this because these are areas where we're competing globally, and that's not going to change very much at all. So that one is not surprising. Where we do see a lot of change is this area they called energy and new frontiers. And they really talk about something called energy dominance. And what was striking about this is that, well, one, the choices of energy areas that they want to focus on, and also that there is no mention of renewable energy in there at all. So that's a big shift for the U.S. as far as energy interests. And so folks focused in energy, it's probably not a surprise, but it's, it is a big shift as far as our research priorities. What's interesting in this one section here is this new frontiers focus. And so polar regions and ocean exploration, the shift here can be explained as this is really related to national security concerns. Those the polar regions, there's a lot of geopolitical issues there, and ocean exploration that is tied to it. But there's still a call for research in these spaces. There's still a need for looking at, physical, biological, and geological processes and systems in those regions. And there will need development of technology to investigate those spaces. So I think there's a lot of wiggle room there for folks who are interested in research in ocean space and polar regions. We just have to see kind of how that's going to shake out and what's attached to it. The other 3 research priority areas that they called out were under the titles of American security, space exploration, and health and biotechnology. National security is a big priority for this administration. And so they're looking to, grow technology in those areas. Some specific call outs around technology for national security were in cybersecurity, AI, and sensing. I think this preparedness and resilience category is interesting because it includes anticipating, preventing, and responding to natural disasters. So that might be a space where some of our faculty might have some interests. That space also includes protecting our critical infrastructure. So that, again, there might be some opportunities there. In space exploration, The driver now really is this competition with China. And so there is a move away from where we've been in the past, where we've had a lot of focus on observation, like deep space observation and telescopes. And the focus is really much more on human space exploration. They plan to go to the moon and Mars. And so this means a lot of technology development that's focused on that, but it's a broad range of technology development and everything from propulsion to radiation hardening to like space weather detection. So there may be a lot of different opportunities in that space, and there's probably a lot of opportunities working with industry in that space. Health is another really huge category, and I can't list everything that it encompasses, but there's going to be a lot of work there in chronic diseases, metabolic disease, neurodegenerative disorders. There's also, they mentioned food safety and food security in that space. And I know we have some folks working in food safety, so that could be an area for them. They've also mentioned, biosafety and biosecurity here, and that's in response to biothreats. So again, that has more of a national security aspect. And then biomanufacturing, again, is another area where it's corresponding to keeping up with what's going on in other countries. And so you notice I have cross-cutting elements. And national security, again, is a big cross-cutting element. They're kind of tying that into a lot of different research. So that's just something to keep in mind as we work with our agencies in the future. But also, they're very focused on growing the workforce, especially the STEM workforce. You may have read that there's concerns that a lot of our STEM graduates are international students. So they want to try and get more domestic STEM. We'll see where that goes, but growing STEM obviously is important. And all of this, a lot of this concerns that they have is around this economic competitiveness. And we're seeing a lot more focus on getting investment from the private sector, getting a lot of collaboration with the private sector. So don't be surprised if you see more funding opportunities that have partnering aspects with, private sector and industry folks. We're already seeing a lot more opportunities coming out that are driving towards that collaboration. Now, moving on to RFIs, I mentioned RFIs a moment ago. RFIs are a great way for us to be more proactive in working with the agencies. The agencies put out RFIs for planning purposes. Sometimes it's for them to develop future opportunities, but sometimes it's because they're doing their own strategic planning. The two examples I put here both happen to be agencies that are trying to, redesign their own internal organization. But sometimes we've seen most of the RFIs are for developing programs, and so this gives you the chance to submit a response that can influence the direction that the agency takes. And I know in the past, when I've worked with faculty before submitting RFIs, we've seen faculty, submit something to a sponsor, and then, months later, an opportunity comes out, and the opportunity has substantial content that was based on our faculty input. So I'm really hoping that we can do more with RFIs and get faculty involved so that we can, try to get these opportunities coming our way, so that it's almost like you're writing the opportunity. Don't say I said that, but you can you can really have some influence over what the agencies are doing by submitting RFIs. So if you do see RFIs and you want some help with responding to them, you could always bring them to the RDI and we could help you work on them. And finally, we're talking about policy and how critical policy really is now. And we've seen so many different executive orders in the 9 months. I know it's a lot, and it's has impacted us in a lot of different ways. And I'll just talk about what we saw this last Friday, this previous Friday. And I call it the Friday surprise because it seems like a lot of these are happening on Friday. I think it's clearly intentional. I think it's because of the news cycle, and there's a hope to kind of keep things quiet. But this last Friday, in order, I think, because to take advantage of the government shutdown, we saw some pretty massive layoffs. And prior to this, the federal government had already been downsized by about 200,000 employees. And so that's including not only layoffs, but a lot of buyouts and a lot of early retirements. So, across the board, about 200,000 people had left the government during this administration. And for this previous weekend, the estimates I've been reading were around 4,000 people laid off. And so this was across the board, but you can see some of the agencies I highlighted here because some of these are particularly relevant to us. Like in Health and Human Services, around 1,100 people laid off. The Department of Ed has already taken a huge beating. About half their staff was already gone, and now another 466 people gone. And the word is that there are no more people working in special ed. The TRIO staff and the IDEA staff are all gone. So they're operating at a bare bones. EPA also lost 20 to 30 people, and energy, which had also lost a lot of people, are down, they've lost another 187. So, and they're also saying that they're planning to, lay off more people. So, this is disheartening because of this loss of institutional knowledge and culture. And we know this will impact the ability to manage grants and run reviews and so forth. Now, however, yesterday there was news that a judge had blocked these layoffs. And, we see a lot of this stuff is in the courts, and it's really hard to say, where it's going to go, how long it's going to take to, work through all of this. The same with what's going on with like the indirect costs. We have this whole issue of the federal government basically saying our indirect costs have to be at 15%, and that's taken to court, and we don't have a resolution yet. So we're waiting on a lot of things to be resolved in the courts. Don't lose hope, though. We'll see where it all shakes out. There's still a lot of folks at the agencies. There's still funding coming through. It is a changing world, though, and we're going to have to figure out how to work through it. But there are ways to work through it, and you can definitely work with us at the RDI to find funding and put your grants together. Now, these are some of the resources that I think you can use to navigate this landscape. The Tracking Trump's Higher Ed Agenda is really great for keeping up on things. FYI is the best science policy update. Then you can get a weekly newsletter sent to your email. The budget tracker I showed you. Federal Register is just great for finding RFIs. If you want to keep up with grant terminations, the Grant Witness site is great. The archived NSF programs, I found this. So if you're wondering if that NSF program is still around or not, that's a great resource to use. And then NIH started doing this highlighted topics. So highlighted topics are topics that they are especially interested in funding. So if you're going to NIH, that would be a good website to go to. So again, we can send you the slides and and get all of these links. And then I also want to point out one more resource. So the RDI has been sending out a Monday memo, and I recently started sending this out. You might have seen it, Funding Opportunities and Research News. Well, at the very bottom of the memo is the research news. And I send a lot of this information, like I've been talking about, a lot of the policy news. And I would appreciate it if anybody has any feedback on the memo, things you'd like to see in the memo, please let me know, because I'm trying to grow and evolve the memo so that it's useful to all of you out there. And with that, that's all I've got. And I'll stop sharing here. Okay. And that's all I got. If there's any questions.
Sandy has a question.
Of course, Sandy does. Hey, Sandy.
Hi. Yes, I do. I was just wondering how people can subscribe to the Monday message. I know it goes out through the research investigators distribution list, but what about those who don't receive it? How do you subscribe to the research investigators list?
That's a good question.
You need to email me.
Okay, you need to email Tina Lucas to get on the research investigators list.
Tina, can you put that in the chat too? And can we include that in the email with the slides when it goes out?
Absolutely.
And I'm going to also add a link in the chat to the RDI Insights newsletter, which is also a really great resource. This was a fabulous presentation. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thanks, Sandy.
Well, I'm going to jump on a flight now. I'll see you guys.
All right.
Have a safe flight.
Trip.
Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Any other
very neat.
questions?
Oh, great talk as usual, Karen.
All right. Thanks, Ross.
Yeah, I don't have any questions either, but this was very helpful. Thank you so much for this information. And I'll be looking forward to getting the recording and the presentation so that I can go back and review it, because that was a lot of information at one time. Thank you.
Right, thanks. All right. Well, if that's it, happy Friday,
And
everybody.
the presentation will be listed on the Research Development Institute's office hour website, hopefully later this afternoon.
Okay. Well, I think we're good then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.